So this session, we're going to have a lot of presentations, so real life examples. So we have 2 providers on this session. We have 5 technologists on this session, so pretty much covering the entire spectrum to use, how do we use predictive analytics and big data. Each speaker is going to present for 5 to 6 minutes. And after that, we have a few questions that the panel is going to talk about, and post which the questions are open to the audience. So I'm going to start off with the first presentation, and apart from being the president of HIMSS India, I'm also the co-founder and CEO of a company called Enlytics. We are an advanced analytics company focused on healthcare. We cater to about 1,650 hospitals and governments across North America, Asia, and Africa. Our goal is basically to give 100 million years of healthy lives back to humanity using predictive analytics. So the typical things, so we have a ready-made platform which has got predictive models, accountable care organization solution for the US market, population health management, real-world evidence, clinical dashboards, health economics, outcomes research, revenue dashboards, and so on and so forth. But very interestingly, I'll just give you an example over here. These are some of the models that are there actually available out of the box within the system. I know it's very difficult for the panel to actually look at the presentation. So what we have over here is across cardiology, nephrology, pulmonary diseases, gastrointestinal, oncology, chronic diseases. So there are a lot of these models that are available. And what does it really do? The best idea is to actually showcase in a demonstration. So we actually predict what is the probability for a patient to get readmitted after the patient is discharged. And it does it with almost like 85% accuracy. The screen that you're seeing over here, the system actually stratifies the risk of all the patients from a chronic disease perspective. So it says who are your high-risk patients, medium risk, low-risk patients, and actually shows that data over there. At the bottom, you will see models with predicting hypertension, diabetes, readmission, and so on and so forth. Some of these models are actually more than 90% accurate, and they're being used in India at various hospitals. More interesting, and probably the reason why I'm actually showing this is to get a lot of questions from the doctors in the audience over here. Interestingly, we have almost 240 delegates who are clinicians in today's event. Most of them seem to be having tea and coffee, so we're waiting for them to come back. So what you can actually see over here is on the left-hand side is the diseases of the patient, the comorbid conditions that the patient has got. So this patient has a digestive system complication, there is an abdominal aneurysm without mention of rupture, sepsis, and so on and so forth. And the system on the right side actually predicts what's going to happen, either an event within a given comorbid condition that is going to occur, or a new disease, a new comorbid condition that actually is going to present itself with a certain amount of probability in a certain set of given days. The same predictive analytics can also be applied. You know, for example, we're speaking about how do we predict diseases to occur in a patient in advance. So as you can see, the system is actually coming back and saying that what is the risk category. So it's giving a percentage over here and saying in how many days that this can be achieved. So again, a lot of you actually as clinicians have your reports, your radiology reports, lab results, or notes that you have probably got it typed in your hospital or clinic. The system has the ability using natural language processing to actually take that and predict this information. So today, most of the systems out there actually do this. So I'm sure Jay Seelan is going to talk about it from an Oracle perspective. There could be others who are going to be talking about it. So natural language processing today is becoming a very integral part of IT solutions. So you're actually going to take a textual note like this and convert it into a keyword or into an ICD diagnosis or a CPT without any human intervention. In fact, we have imaging analytics, and I'm hoping someone is going to talk about it. So today, the ability for systems to take a DICOM and an image, let's say a CT lung image or a fundoscopic image, and actually say without human intervention with a 90% accuracy, to come back and say this patient, because of this fundoscopic image, the patient is actually has diabetic retinopathy stage or grade 3 or grade 4. Or the ability to look at a CT lung and actually say whether the patient has got, what stage, grade cancer that the patient actually has got. So there is a huge amount of work that's happening in deep learning space, and I'm hoping that we're going to be talking about that shortly. For hospitals, in terms of revenue forecasting, their inventory optimization, so this is all a part of your analytics. So as long as there is large data, the amount of savings that can basically happen for hospitals is huge. So this is something which we're going to hear from, Ms. Gopal Devanhalli, the CEO of Manipal Healthcare. We're also going to hear from Dr. Diwan from Fortis Escorts Group, from a clinical perspective, how it's actually being used. So just as an example, this is something that's being done in the United States. At the bottom right-hand corner, you see traffic light signals. So we can actually predict in the next 52 weeks in which weeks there is a high risk of a patient getting a respiratory attack. Could be asthma, COPD, whatever respiratory attack. And it's almost like 85–90% accurate, saying that the patient is going to get an attack. So you can't stop an attack from occurring, but what you can at least do is the care coordinators can call them and ensure that they're carrying their medication or inhalers with them. So an unnecessary admission or an emergent admission can actually be stopped. So the last one is basically from so if you look at the more from a myocardial infarction perspective, how you can actually look at the data, there is a bottom score that comes up. The system is predicting that this patient has a high probability of getting a recurrence of a myocardial infarction, or it could be a first-time occurrence of a myocardial infarction. What the system does is it's not applying simple risk scores. So most of the time when we talk about predictive analytics and big data, so these are machine learning algorithms, the deep learning algorithms, neural networks that is basically applied on large population data sets. And the system comes back and says that out of these million diabetic patients or cardiac patients that I have across hospitals, across the world, these models are used now to predict what is going to happen to each one of us. So the day is not very far off, 10, 15, 20 years. In the future, and it could be even 2 years, I'm sure there'll be a great company will come up and say, you know what, I'm pretty much 99% accurate, which will give the power to the physicians to look at all of this information and help them to take the right, diagnosis, prognosis at that juncture. It is basically an assistive tool for them, because as the data is becoming huge and huge, it's becoming very difficult for humans to, for any human being to gather all of that information at the point of care and say this needs to be done. So I'll just leave, I know I've just gone through a whole lot of things, but the idea was just to give you a snapshot of what's happening in the industry. And I'll let my colleague Jay Seelan take it further from here.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk about how do we really aggregate data from multiple source systems and then really use it for meaningful insights that you can gain. So if you look at the overall health system globally, there are 4 fundamental factors that's really impacting. One, more and more we see the health system moving from fee-for-service to outcome-driven model. Secondly, the fundamentals of science is changing. The way how medicine has been practiced 10, 20 years ago, and now it's completely kind of changing in a way. And third, so we are talking about a lot of data. In the past, we used to have few terabytes of data, but now each hospital is kind of managing almost like petabytes of information. And lastly, if you look at regulatory standpoint, the patient privacy laws are becoming much more stringent. Now, if you look at how all these factors impacting in the health system in our country point of view, we still use a fair amount of point applications, homegrown tools. Even if we use some standard solution, it's not really able to interoperate or communicate with other applications. So these are fundamental challenges. Now, how do we really transform this in terms of where it is versus where we want to kind of leapfrog? So I'm just going to kind of show a little bit about the transformation journey of healthcare. You see that there are three different the growth engines in terms of how the medicine is practiced. So in the past, it used to be a lot of trial and error because a lot of information is not really available for physicians to make a meaningful diagnosis. Now it's slowly moving from trial and error to evidence-based medicine, and eventually it's kind of leading to precision medicine. How do you really provide targeted therapies accurately to the particular target segment? Now, if you look at the lower bottom, the trend is clearly moving from core transactional applications to a more context-sensitive analytical applications. Like what Vamsi talked about is actually one of the context-sensitive analytical applications. Now, so how do we really make this transformation possible? Moving from trial and error medicine to evidence-based, eventually leading to precision medicine. So clearly the answer is data. Data and analytics can really kind of help us to make that decision. One is, so fundamentally what we're talking about is asking the hard questions. Now, how do you really ask these questions? For example, what works for the patient and why it works for certain patient population, right? Who it works for, how do you really make it targeted therapies to the individual patients? Now, can we do comparative clinical analysis in terms of what works best for the particular patient community? Or when it should be used in terms of best practices to really get insights for all these questions. So clearly we need to kind of look at analytics as a way to do. Now, if you look at analytics again, there are two parts. One is the data analysis and representation. So this is where a lot of people kind of spend their time and effort. But I'm going to talk about the other part of it, which is how do you really aggregate data from diverse source systems? How do you really normalize it? And then really use it for meaningful analysis. So that's the hard part, which kind of I'll cover today. So you see that in the screen, like a lot of source systems, clinical systems, finance systems, HR applications, supply chain, and research data, a lot of data from clinical trials. Now, how do you really put all of them in one single scalable healthcare data model? So that's a fundamental challenge that we have. Now, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time in this slide. It will really help you to understand how do you really take data from all these source systems. So we, in Oracle, what we've done is we built a tool called Data Integrator. So it has pre-built ETLs, which we call as extract, transform, load. So it can actually talk to different source systems, pull up data, and put that into a data warehouse foundation, where you can actually do the mapping of source data into the warehouse foundation data. Now, then once you've got a copy of the data moved into the warehouse, then you could apply business rules. Now, there are multiple ways you can handle this. One is either you take a copy of data moving from source to the warehouse foundation, or you could even make it real-time data integration. As and when the data hits clinical systems, you can actually make that available in the warehouse itself, and then you apply the business rules. Now, there are three important points that I want to talk about. One is the terminology normalization. So Vamsi talked about how do you normalize terminology like ICD-10, SNOMED CT. So think of a health system where they have two different HIS systems. One HIS uses, say, ICD-10, the other system uses SNOMED CT. Now, how do I really rationalize the whole thing? In the new source system, I want everything to be converted into SNOMED CT as a base. Now, you could really do that through this platform that I'm talking about. The other important thing is MPI. Now, again, we're looking at multiple patient IDs within the health system itself. Some of these IDs could be created over a period of time, or it could be through mergers and acquisitions where the hospital could be using different IDs itself. Now, how do you really identify the duplicates? How do you merge the health records? Today, if you look at in India, we don't have the concept of family health record. So how many hospitals can identify who is the parent of the patient, who is the mother? Do we really have access to a consolidated view of family health record? So all this is very much possible when you have platforms like this. And look at the right extreme. So these are the data marts. So what we've done is we have almost about 55 pre-prioritized data marts. It also has the relevant APIs. So any application vendors or partners can actually build rapidly analytical applications over and above this platform. Now, the fundamental, if you look at the base of the whole platform is the data model. So we built one of the world's best healthcare data model. So this has been used by large organizations like Mayo Clinic, UPMC. Now we have a number of customers who are using this data model. So what is actually this all about is single source of truth. You have data from different source systems. Now put all of them in one single scalable healthcare data model. So in fact, we have about 500 plus tables, 5,500 plus attributes. So any data field that you have, whether it's public health system or private, so we have provision to map all of them in one single data model. Now, so we also have a tool called Cohort Explorer. So this is very simple web-based tool. You can give access to clinicians. So clinicians themselves can actually test the hypothesis. They can define the inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. They can actually look at, drop down into each of these elements. Diagnosis, specimen, can go narrow down and build, test, and validate the hypothesis itself. I'm not going to spend more time on these. I think Vamsi already talked about some of these dashboards which you can do. So I'm going to talk about another dimension of the whole analytics, right? So you saw that the value chain, where how we moved from trial and error medicine to evidence-based and then to the precision medicine. So one of the important thing is genomic data. Why this is important? If you look at most of the illnesses are caused by genetic abnormalities. Either we inherit those genetically through our parents, or it could be through some of the mutations that happen over a period of time. So it is important to really bring in the clinical data along with the genetic information of the patient to really make some meaningful analysis and targeted interventions. So what we've done is we actually have a capability to take raw data from sequencing machines. As you all know, there's a number of sequencing machines available in the market. It could be Illumina, LifeCode, next generation sequencing. So all these provides the raw data in different formats. So what we've done is make it really agnostic. We put that raw data into this platform, the omics data model, and then interpret it, and then provide a summary, and also cross-compare it with the publicly available research data, that is public domain reference data as well. So this actually gives a lot of new insights which doesn't exist in the past. Now, this is just an example of how this entire data model is built. So you see in the top layer, Ensemble, Hugo, these are all the publicly available research databases. So what I'm talking about is take a specimen of a patient, take a gene sequence, and compare that against all these reference data and find if there is any mutation already available for that particular sequence, or is it completely new insight where we need to either move towards the research process or not. So that is the kind of possibilities. Again, the number of analysis you can do, it could be, say, simple variant analysis. Those of you come from the molecular biology background probably will be able to relate much better in terms of how do we do this gene expression analysis, copy number variation analysis,
Jay?
And all of them. Yeah. So I'm going to just, the last, I think, again, so I talked about genomic data, I talked about clinical data. Now, how do I converge all of them in one single model? So you take a patient group, patient population, and then find out for that particular patient population, what is this gene sequence? Is there a possibility of mutations? So that is the kind of value that you could actually derive. For example, to answer these questions in terms of find patients who are poor respondents of particular drug, why having a mutation in a particular gene sequence? Can we really answer these types of questions? So that's a fundamental challenge again. So last, I'm just going to end my presentation with one important thing. So these are the latest statistics published by Nature in April 2015. So what it says is, among 10 top leading marketed drugs, the effectiveness is actually 1 in 25. So are we really, taking medication that is meant for large population, but is it really effective to the individual population or not? So that's the fundamental challenge. So clearly the world is moving from translational into a precision medicine. So the technology that I talked about can actually enable, in terms of convergence of clinical data with the genomic data and provide meaningful analysis. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Mr. Gopal Devnandi. I'm sorry, sir. It's Satish, Dr. Satish Rai.
Good morning, everyone. After two enlightening presentations, my work becomes much easier. And my work also becomes easier for the audience because I am mix up both the houses. So I'm a doctor, I'm an intensivist from pediatrics background. But my research area has been over the last 15 years on biomedical informatics, mostly on clinical decision support systems and wearable sensors. So why consumer-centric healthcare and how its relevance to what we call as analytics-driven healthcare in the world. And to this, and what we are doing in Xerox, I would just start with, what's health of health? Is health is healthy, or is health is really getting to the ICU? And I would say health is really in the ICU, and we do not have enough beds in the ICU. So state of health is really not good. And why is that? The world is getting heavier and older. That's a very profound statement, came from WHO as well as Nature, which means is we are burdened with metabolic syndrome diseases like CVD and COPDs and cancer and asthma. On the other side, the BRICA countries which are coming up, they are increasing a great degree of demands where acute diseases are coming into some control, but they are having a largest burden of chronic diseases. So we are living in a world which is filled with chronic diseases. And when I see this through the economic lens, I feel chronic disease, once diagnosed, the person has to die with the chronic disease, which means the face time it requires with the healthcare provider, with the patient, is quite phenomenal and quite high compared to acute disease when I treat it with antibiotics, or I fix a surgical complaint, or I do a retinal implant. Whereas the real problem, what this situation has led to the world is we have an enormous amount of face time requirement from doctors, from providers, from technology, which is just not there. So getting through normal way of treating health condition is just not going to be the way things are going to be. So over 20 years, we have been thinking about telehealth, technology-enabled health, and this is going to really solve the issue. But we have yet to see whether it has really solved the issue. If we just see about statistics, we do not have technology-enabled, analytics-driven healthcare solution that has transformed countries or communities or even big companies. What it means is we are somewhere going back to the basic, and why it is. If we go back to 1900s, all of us who are doctors here, we are taught prevention is always better than cure, and it had a great meaning behind it. What it means is earlier healthcare, previous to the industrial era, the doctor went to the patient, he saw the patient, he diagnosed the patient, he prescribed the patient and returned. Or the patient went to the doctor, the entire transaction happened over one setting. Post-industrialization, what happened, we moved from point of care to distributed care. What it means is we had x-rays, we had ultrasounds, we had CT scans, we had big IT systems, but it needed also application specialists to run this. What it meant is the patient came to doctor, then went through various tests, and after that he went through again the treatment, which made the entire cost of transaction unsustainable. And we have been following that model till now, which is in today's world in health affairs, it's called sick care. We are trying to fix sickness, whereas what we are taught in healthcare economics, in preventive medicine, is to preserve health. So the real idea is if we just apply analytics to understand how many people are diabetic, or how many diabetics are going to have complications, or how many complications are going to end up in the emergency room, maybe that is just not going to be enough. Where a holistic approach has to be taken, where we need to preserve health instead of trying to fix sick care. So having said this, I don't want to paint a very pessimistic picture here. We have been talking about connecting health information from patients supporters, from providers, from clinicians, from population health, from genomics, to the doctor or to the decision maker or the policy maker who is making a decision. But all this has started happening maybe over 5 to 6 years as we started seeing the Fitbits, the Intel Health Guides, or the Philips Motivas, or there are systems which are now commoditizing the way healthcare data is acquired. But somewhere there is also a big mistake which is made is with this wearable revolution, we feel healthcare revolution is going to happen. But your wearable which is going to give you an accelerated data or a diet data or a lifestyle data is just not enough for a doctor to diagnose this severe chronic condition. So if at all we have to get into this assistive telemedicine to prescriptive telemedicine, what we call analytics-driven telemedicine. Our data acquisition has to be comprehensive, which means not only wearable data, but all comprehensive vital parameters, along with genomics, along with population health, along with social profile, along with social economic profile, which arrives at a state what we call as a desirable or a personalized state. So this question I always get, that's why I put this slide explicitly where, you say Xerox, Xerox is the printer company which is doing healthcare, so that's where I just want to, touch upon it. Xerox is a major player in US for healthcare, where almost every 2 out of 3 individuals we touch. It's a suite of companies, but to be focused on, it serves currently 39 out of 50 states in US to cater their Medicare and Medicaid. But on the other side, on the commercial payer and pharma also we play one of the biggest roles. But what it really gets Xerox at the forefront in this analytic-driven world is we handle a huge amount of data, be it from pharmacy, be it from pharmaceuticals, be it from the payer, the provider, the genomics to the sensors. We get huge amount of data. And we have a suite of application, what's called Midas, which has been doing analytics-driven healthcare to predict all that things what we have been listening over 2,000 hospitals. So in this scenario, where we are looking for is arriving at this, what I call as consumer-centric healthcare. So consumer-centric healthcare has been described as a cohesive platform which is just not analytics driven as data is given and what is the meaning we are making out of it, but every person, I think this is really disturbing, every person as they are born, it's called a health equity state. So as we are born, based on our inheritance, based on our genetics, based on our socioeconomic status, based on our education, based on the environment where we are, based on the people who we are surrounded with, we are born with a health equity. And as we grow, our health equity grows to an optimum level when we are called adults, where a country or a community gets the real return on investment of having a citizen in the country. That's where, as unfortunately we have incidents of illness or sickness, our health state derives or deteriorates into an undesirable state, what we call sickness or illness episode, and then a treatment plan comes in to try to pull this person back to the desired state. And that's what we want to do, either with a comorbidity analysis or to identify whether this person is comparing with another 1 million patients whose genomics data I know, or I'm comparing them with comorbidity analysis of another 1,000 patients whom I know. So ultimate fundamental behind this is, can I identify a pure health state of an individual? If I can identify that, can I predict it? If I can predict it, can I provide him with a personalized care plan? So how it translates
Dr. Satish, I'm sorry, you'll have to close it.
Yeah, I'm done. So how this translates into our application is we get various sources of data, what has been told earlier by the speakers, and we convert them into suggestive platforms. So a hospital can know which group of patients to focus on, a doctors can know whether the ACO needs to coordinate with the readmission specialist, or whether this person is going to get into the ICU, or whether this person is going to get outside the ICU. So we are a lab who are present in Bangalore, as well as in Grenoble, in Park, as well as Park West in Canada. And these are few of our results, what I would definitely try to highlight here. So we do work before the hospital, inside the ICU, and after the person is discharged out of the ICU. And we have some pretty impressive results to talk about, where we can predict with a fair amount of accuracy based on Indian patient data whether this person is going to have a stroke, as well as we can predict very well whether this person is going to have an acute hypotensive episode, as well as we can predict the mortality, as well as we can predict the morbidity. So that's where I would say maybe I will leave with a few things. This I see is bringing India again back to the IT revolution, what IT made India and Bangalore is known for, and India is known for. Data is democratic. Genomics data, population health data, these are democratic data. And the amount of population what we have in India, suddenly this makes us a very opportune place to play in consumer-centric healthcare or analytics-driven healthcare. So that I definitely want is going to help us. And more, I would suggest maybe to the analytics-driven company, physiological models and healthcare economics models are going to play the differentiation, and pure analytics-driven approach might be, falling short of the thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Satish. I would request Mr. Gopal Devanahalli, the Chief Operating Officer of Manipal Healthcare. So it'll be great if you can also give a little background about yourself, sir.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gopal. I've been with Manipal for around a year. Before that, I used to work with Infosys for 15 years. So I bring in technology bent to healthcare. So I'm excited to be here. And we were all big data and predictive analytics is, as somebody just said, everybody wants to say that they are doing something about it. Everybody is excited about it. But there's so much confusion on what this actually means. Is it really business intelligence, which has been around for so many years? So what's so different about it is the question that we all keep asking ourselves. So I think it's very important that after you heard from my co-panelists who kind of laid the stage for what this is all about, what I wanted to talk to you about is what have we been doing the last 1 year in big data and predictive analytics, what kinds of pilots we've been trying out, and where do we think we believe we are going to invest in this space going forward. So that's what I'm going to present. Before I get into my presentation, just a little bit about Manipal. We've got around 15 hospitals. We're primarily a tertiary and secondary care hospital chain. We also have a hospital outside of India, which is in Malaysia. We have also several clinics through our Manipal Ankur subsidiary, which is focused on men's health and IVF. We have, and this is from a big data perspective, something which really interested me. 2 million people touched us last year. So that's the kind of numbers we're talking about. 2 million patients we've been serving on an annual basis. Of course, we have over 5,000 beds and several doctors and nurses. Our core values that we pride ourselves on are clinical excellence, patient centricity, and ethical practices. And the reason I wanted to mention that was when we are talking about investments in big data analytics, it needs to either make sense to improve patient excellence or patient experience, or it should make the life of our clinicians better. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense talking about interesting experiments if it doesn't really either benefit our patients or our clinicians, which is what we are focusing on. So I touched a little bit on 2 million patients. So there's huge amounts of data. Big data is all about, and why is it different from business intelligence? Really what we're saying is that data is, as some of our panelists have just said, so in the previous session also we heard about it, the technology has resulted in huge amounts of data being generated. Devices are generating data, patient visits are generating data, labs are generating data, so huge amounts of data. Our partners are generating data like insurance companies, etc., etc. The thing is, what are we doing with this data? And one of the biggest challenges, of course, is most of this data is not interoperable. They don't talk to each other. It's very difficult to make sense across data streams, but there is huge amount of data. Now, the approach we decided to take was, let's not keep saying, look, it's very difficult to look at this data and make sense out of it. Let's break it up. Let's take it as is and figure out what experiments we can do. And this is my advice, because if you're going to say that, look, I want perfect data, only then I'm going to start doing predictive analytics, it's not going to happen. We are going to have multiple sources of information in spite of all the talk we had in the previous panel about standards that are going to come our way. It's probably going to be a few years before those standards are going to happen. And more importantly, we all have legacy IT systems. We're not going to switch our legacy IT systems in a hurry because it's going to cost a lot of money. So we have to look for solutions which sit on top of these data sources, pull it all together, and then start doing interesting experiments. So that's what we should be looking at. Our broad, therefore, strategy is that if you look at it broadly, there are 4 things. And one is operation analytics. How can we use this data to look at process improvements or cost optimization, or even things like attrition predictors? Because as many of my colleagues in this industry know, our attrition rates for our clinicians are very high in the nursing and paramedical staff. So how do you predict that? So things like that. How do you look at data to come up with models which will predict various kinds of things on the operation side? Second thing, which I think there's a huge opportunity, is on customer analytics to improve experience. And I'll talk about one of the experiments that we have done. So this is very critical, and this is easy to do because most hospitals today, I think at least we have started capturing feedback, we get complaints, we get people are commenting on social networks. So all this data is being captured. So you can, make sense out of that and figure out what is it that you could predict about improving the sentiment for customers. Then revenue analytics, I think Vamsi already touched on it. So there's a big opportunity to look at forecasts. Today, how do you predict volumes is typically over the last month or previous year kind of models, but is there a way to combine it with holidays, with publicly available information, weather information, information about religious festivals, etc., to start predicting volumes and thereby then figuring out how your assets need to be utilized. So there are a bunch of things you could do. Today, a lot of people came late for the first session because of the traffic, and Google Maps actually predicts traffic load pretty well, as all of us know. But recently, Google Maps just announced that they're going to come up with a product to help predict restaurants, which restaurants are not so busy at that time when you decide to go out to have lunch, only because we don't have data today in a form which is easily analytical, easily can be analyzed. Manipal, for example, is now, over the last couple of years, we've been working on EMR, and that will make it much more easier. But otherwise, we have huge amount of data which is all scanned and lying in a HIS, but you really can't do much with it because of the situation of the data. But that's a big opportunity, huge amount of data. Most of us are sitting on it. It is monetizable. We can use it to not only benefit consumers and patients in India, but also, you can, for hospitals, it's actually a revenue potential also. So what are some experiments that we have done? I'll just quickly touch on it. On customer feedback analytics, what we've done is, and this is a predictive analytics thing I'm talking about. I'm not talking about regular business intelligence. What we did was, we've been collecting data in a digital form for customers for the last 1 year. We have something called NPS, which is, will you advocate Manipal or not, which is a simple question. But also there are a bunch of questions that we ask about, how was your experience with nurses, doctors, etc. So almost 40 questions that are asked. What we did with the last 1 year's data is we used different kinds of statistics models to figure out what are those 5 or 6 key questions which will determine if somebody will become a promoter, that is, he's going to promote Manipal, or a detractor. That means he will go and say that, look, it's pretty bad. And we came up with a predictive model which was predicting almost 85% accuracy. So that was a model that, and a bunch of factors. So it was based on 6 key questions. Out of all those 40 questions, 6 key questions determined if somebody is likely to be a promoter or a detractor. And therefore we said, okay, this is good, but what do we do with it? So we came up with a concept of an interim survey. So a patient gets admitted. After 24 hours, we do a small survey only on those 6 questions, so that we obviously don't spend too much time on it, but we look at those 6 questions. Based on our model, it will predict whether this person is likely to be a promoter or a detractor. If it's likely to be a detractor, an alert goes immediately to our customer service team to go and do something there. So they go make an intervention, understand what the issues are. And we've seen over the last 3 months since this pilot is going on, that most of these patients, after they get discharged and then they give us a final feedback, they have actually moved up in the scores. So it's been working for us. So now we are figuring out...
Mr. Devanalli,
yeah.
So you'll have to.
Yeah, I'll just finish.
Thanks.
Then the other one is on inventory management. And this, some people have been talking about. And what we have done here is that we have a model which will look at, for consumables, in our stores in different hospitals, what is the possibility of stockouts based on historical data. So this is the other pilot that we've been doing. And then we've been doing some around operations improvements. So that's my presentation. Just one last comment I want to make. There are challenges in terms of adoption of using big data analytics. The challenges are in terms of the data types that I talked about, but that is solvable. And the other challenges is how do you actually look at small things that you can bite, show success, and then slowly roll it out across the company. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I would request Mr. Shirish Sahai, the CEO of Wolters Kluwer's India.
Good morning. My name is Shirish Sahai. I'm the CEO for Wolters Kluwer. So I've been with Wolters Kluwer for close to around 4 months now. But before that, I had spent 15 years in GE Healthcare. So my topic is about clinical decision support tools in mHealth. But before I go into that, I would like to talk about a story, a real life story. And this story is about what happened just a few months ago in Nepal. And in Nepal, people in India about it. Close to around 23,000 people were injured and 9,000 people lost their lives, right? If you see this situation, how can you apply mHealth where there is no infrastructure, there is no connectivity, there is no electricity? You would think that mHealth might not work here. But really proud to say that mHealth did work there, based on one clinical decision support tool, which is basically the downloadable version in a smartphone which is available even offline. And it did help to save lives. And in an emergency situation like this, an earthquake, things like that, every doctor is supposed to do not more about his specialty, but things that are out of his comfort zone, that are out of his specialty. And that's where this tool, which is clinical evidence-based tool, which can guide the doctor to give the treatment in 90 seconds, give the answer to the doctor to give a treatment to the patient in 90 seconds. That's what this tool is all about. And it really helped there. And we heard that from the doctors who actually used it in Nepal. And also we heard from Dr. Goodwin from Harvard, who reviewed the fact that he did not use it when he was deployed there, and he would definitely love to use it when he gets deployed again in Nepal or any other situation. Now, what I talked about just now was more about an emergency, a catastrophe. But imagine a daily scenario. You'll be surprised to know that all physicians, in 2 out of the 3 clinical encounters they have, they get 11 questions a day. Clinical questions a day. But what's surprising is that 60% of those questions that the doctor, when they're treating the patient, go unanswered. And there are multiple reasons for that. There's a humongous amount of research. How do you look through that data? How do you find that answer? There's very less time. And some people might think that probably there's no answer to these, one of the 11 questions. But the fact of the matter is, if those questions were answered, 5 to 8 patient decisions would get changed. And now that's really remarkable, right? If those questions. Now that takes me to mHealth, where if it is powered with clinical decision support tool, the one that I just talked about, what made a difference in Nepal, it can really help to answer those questions and change the patient decisions that are being made every day. Now let me go closer to home. All of us know about the infrastructure challenges that we are facing in India. We are the lowest in terms of practitioners, but population ratio, lowest in terms of hospital beds to the population ratio. But we do have a great opportunity in terms of mobile. The earlier panel talked about increased proliferation of internet connectivity, mobile connectivity. India is going to be the 3rd largest smartphone user. Now this gives us a great opportunity to have mHealth clinical decision support tools which can really change the effectiveness, the way the patients are being treated. Now the question then comes in, will doctor use it? If we give them, will the doctors use it? I would say vehemently yes. And the reason is not based on what I'm saying, but backed by true research. The research was done with 68 countries, and 77% of the doctors came out that they are using their smartphone when they're treating the patient. Now that's remarkable. But then you'll say that it's a global study. India, things are changing. For India, these numbers are close to 25%. There are close to around 75,000 doctors who are on LinkedIn. More than 100,000 doctors who are using these tools today. So India too has a great opportunity to get these evidence-based technology. Now, there are 2 major focus areas. mHealth can play entire ecosystem. It can make a difference. But I would say there are 2 main thrust areas. The first thrust area is the solutions in the patient pathway. The second is healthcare system strengthening. Let me first talk about in the patient pathway. Here I would like to introduce you to a tool. Can you imagine, I talked about the Nepal story. In this smartphone, without internet, if you can get an answer, if a physician can get an answer to any questions related to 22 clinical specialties, an answer which is truly evidence-based, an answer which has come out of the journals published as of yesterday, an answer which is vetted by 5,000 experts around 61 countries. This tool is called UpToDate. It has that answer. And it has been in use for over 20 years and well researched. Just to quote the one that is on the screen, the Singapore National University Hospital did a research. When the doctor, when he was treating the patient on the bedside, when he used UpToDate tool, the tool that I talked about, he changed his decision in treating the patient 37% of the time. So that's the power of the tool. Just to quote another research which was done by Harvard Medical School over a span of 3 years. So they researched over 3,000 hospitals in US, and they concluded after 3 years that hospitals which were using this tool saved 11,000 more lives than the hospitals which were not using this tool. So a remarkable tool, and imagine the situation, the infrastructure problem. We just heard about the PHC. In the first session we talked about in Northeast, there is PHCs being used. The doctor is sitting in Nepal, in Tripura. How can this affect? If you have this tool available, even in the PHC, in the mobile phone, in the smartphone, they can take the decision then there. So this is with regard to the patient pathway. And by the way, some of the countries have actually subscribed as countries. The countries on the screen that you can see, these countries have made this tool as their way to treat patients for the entire country. There was a talk about in the earlier panel discussion about medical education. 90% of the US medical education colleges are using this tool. More than 70% of the US doctors are using this. Now, India is also not far away. We have just started the journey, but we have few thousand of our customers already using this tool, and their response on the efficacy is on the right-hand side, as you can see, 95% of them, just the survey that we conducted in 2014, said that they really found this tool to be useful in affecting how they were treating the patient. Now, let me just move on to the second thrust area for mHealth, which is more about how to change the healthcare system. Request you to play the video.
Mr. Sai, I'm sorry, I'll have to make
Just
your
last
closing
slide.
remarks, sir.
POC Advisor, an electronic system designed for the early detection of sepsis. How does it work? A new patient's vital signs and lab results are relayed from the EHR to the WK Cloud service via a secure, HIPAA-compliant, encrypted VPN link. POC Advisor supports a wide variety of exchange formats, including all standard HL7 interfaces. Once received, the language engine maps the diverse data to standard terminologies. Behind it all is a rules engine built on clinical knowledge from rich content sources like UpToDate, Lexicomp, and Provation. The rules engine accesses the standardized data and executes thousands of clinical scenarios to determine what decision support is warranted. In this case, the analysis indicates that the patient is suffering from severe sepsis. POC Advisor then delivers relevant, succinct clinical decision support to the appropriate device at the point of care. The nurse is alerted to begin treatment for sepsis and is prompted to communicate with the on-call physician. The physician confirms the decision support recommendations, and the patient receives the appropriate treatment. POC Advisor has helped to save a life by quickly delivering comprehensive decision support in a convenient and actionable manner.
Just to close then on this, sepsis, as all of us know, that it's a blood poisoning. And this clinical trial was done in John Muir Hospital. And it was done in some wards. They provided this tool, and some wards they did not. The results were fantastic. the wards they provided this tool saved 50% more lives than the wards they did not provide. So, I would just like to conclude by the last slide saying that mHealth is here to stay, but then it can really be harnessed true power if we have clinical decision support coupled with mHealth. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would request Dr. Sandeep Diwan. Head of Department, Critical Care, Fortis Escorts Group.
Okay, let me begin as an end user first, because I'm the one who uses all this data that gets generated, and I'm sure there must be some of you who must be still thinking, okay, this is more about data collection. What do we do with this data? Because that's also the second part of it. So I'm a practicing critical care physician in Fortis Group, and I also run a group of ICUs across India by the name of eICU, which you are seeing Critinext, which we called as Future of Critical Care in India. Now, I divide data into two forms. One is an acute data. Acute means data analysis right there and that point of time, as everybody has shared, and can it make a difference to the life of the person at 2 a.m. in the night? Because the way India is developing at this point of time in small cities, we get a lot of good physicians who do a lot of good OPD practice. But if I need good emergency care in a small city at 2 a.m. in the night, I'm sure most of you would be saying it's difficult to get. So that is where the difference between life and death lies, and we all know that what we do in the first 1 hour, it is known as the golden hour in critical care, makes a huge difference between the life and death of the patient. And I'm sure this POC advisor that you are doing as a patient of septic shock, it will go a long way in helping these kind of patients. So that is one part of data, and one is the chronic data. Like if you are making a difference in the life and death of a single patient, it is assumed that it should ultimately make a difference in the mortality, and you had shared up some of the data from US. I will try to share some of data from India, which we have been trying to generate in last 5 years, on whether we can make a difference in the outcome. So I'll not go into too many details, and we know what are the objectives that we are in. I'm sure most of you have interacted with critical care at this point of time, because all of you have been in the healthcare industry, and it's the backbone of any healthcare system. We call it the next stumbling block, because as we are aging population, most of us will somehow end up in the ICU. Those days of us ending in the homes we are not lucky as much as our grandparents or our previous generations were, and most of us will end up in the ICU. So it's a requirement that is going to only increase, and this is a typical ICU look like. How eICU started is a very interesting story, because we got a call in 2010 in one of our Fortis hospitals, which is way far in Raipur, about a kid who had been operated by a cardiac surgeon, but somehow even after 10 days of surgery, they could not get the kid off the ventilator. And that was a time when 3G was launched in India, and we had a Samsung tablet, and they showed us the data of that patient with the help of that tablet, and it was fortunately launched in Raipur also, and we could save this, the kid, got him off the ventilator, and he still comes from follow-up. And that's how this whole eICU concept we thought came. We know that critical care is all about gadgetry, about monitors, about ventilator, about technology, but then we have to help patients in the smaller cities also, and that is where it helps. This is what we feel is the way to move in the acute stage when you are trying to help a patient. We have an aging population. We have very less availability of critical care physicians all across the country. We produce only 60 in a year. I happen to be one of the teachers, and the requirement is huge. We have to develop some system by which we can save more lives in the acute scenario. And obviously we have to benchmark the quality of intensive care. I'm sure Gopal must be realizing it, and we realize it very frequently in Fortis. While in Delhi NCR will give this level of care, the level of care in the same group hospital at the tier 2 will be a huge difference. While the expectation of the consumer is that if I'm going to a Fortis ICU or a Manipal ICU, I'll get the same care as I'm getting either in Bangalore or in Delhi, which is not the case, which is not the real-time case. So this is what the models like POC Advisor or models like eICU should help in monitoring these patients and helping save more lives. And this is what we started is, as I told, we started with a smartphone. Then we moved on to camera, servers, screens, smart alerts. We created the first smart alerts in Asia. Then we did the LIS, HIS integration and happened to be more of an IT guy rather than a critical care now. And now we have moved to remote audiovisual connectivity, EMR connectivity, and we have moved to a system where you can see any patient from anywhere. You can do tripartite discussions and we can help on the clinical front. While most of the data in healthcare is now being generated on the revenue front, the billing front, but I think the time is coming now because ultimately the healthcare will have to move to a clinical documentation and the clinical improvement, because that is what has been lacking for the last 15 years. And I agree with you, Gopal, when you said that this is the area to work on because nobody has concentrated on the data. This is how we document outcomes. You can look at the patient, you can look at the data, you can look at the blood pressure changes immediately, whether it's happening in Raipur or Amritsar or Dehradun or anywhere, and you can actually tell the doctor on duty who's only a MBBS or sometimes even not MBBS to titrate the medication, how much fluid to give. In medicine it's 11 questions as you were mentioning. In critical care there are 50 questions that are coming to your mind on how do I things do in that 1 hour so that I can save the life of the patient. This is what the data shows in eICU, and this is what the command center looks at. You are getting the data on the right side are the command center screen, on the left side are the alarm system that we have designed, which get generated in the command center, whether it's any other tier 2 cities, and that's how you help the patient in the night. So this is the audiovisual on which we rely. On the left side is the software that we rely. The software is available, but ultimately you have to connect everything to give a clinical delivery system to the patient. We have documented lower mortality in the Indian scenario, and I agree with you on the US data. We have been able to decrease the mortality by about 50 to 60%, and it's published now in the international literature by our name. We have decreased the complications on intensive care to about 30 to 40%. We have documented better bed utilization with ALOS, although that's a soft predictor of quality, but the most important predictor are mortality, which we think it changes. And obviously it's very satisfying for the patients, because ultimately in India the patient doesn't shift from a city, the family shifts from the city to a larger hospital, and they have to carry a lot of baggage with them. And if you can counsel them, no, this patient can be managed in a small city with this kind of a support system, they will be at ease, and they are very, very less anxious. For the doctors and the nurses on site is a boon. Let's accept it. The poor resident doctor in the night duty will take a nap. Let's accept it. He's a human being. He has to sleep for 2 hours, 3 hours in the night duty, and obviously whatever you may do, he will still sleep. So he also knows that there's a second pair of eye which is watching my patients, and he can also raise an alert whenever there's a problem. So it leads to a lot of patient nursing satisfaction. Some of the data, we have been able to reduce the number of cardiac arrests in the smaller institute to the tune of, I would say, 100% mortality to 50%. We found a site where we entered any patient who had a cardiac arrest would die. So there's no return of spontaneous circulation. Obviously with the tool, with the data, with the on-site management, we have been able to make a difference. Post-EICU, out of 484 patients, 40 had cardiac arrest with 24 deaths. So we have been able to save 16. While in the pre-EICU era, all 59 patients who had cardiac arrest would die. You can decrease the infections with the EICU mechanisms, you can decrease the ICU stay, and more importantly, you can give the same level of care. I would still agree with a little bit of difference between the spokes and the hub. These are the alert system, and now let me come to the large data analysis, because that's what the key aim of this. When you get large data analysis, you can actually try to understand what is the profile of the patients that are coming to your ICU. Are you dealing with more septic patients? Are you dealing with more chronic-ated patients? Are you dealing with more liver patients? For example, we run an ICU in Punjab, and the chronic liver disease in Punjab is huge. We run an ICU in Kathmandu, the liver disease is huge. When we go to east side of the country, the disease profile is completely different in the ICU. So that's something which can help. This is what the data that we track. This is the publications that we have done in the eICU. So this was in Jan 2014 in Society of Critical Care, because all mechanism data is generally generated from US. Now we published this paper on the future of medicine, India's first tele-ICU CritNext, can it make a difference? Then this was a very good presentation in Paris in 2013. India's first eICU, changing paradigm of healthcare delivery in developing world. And second, can we decrease antibiotic usage in ICU in the Indian scenario? Because we know the antibiotic burden in India is huge, the infection is huge. Antibiotics saved can easily be converted into the revenues saved for the hospital. But more importantly, you are discharging on patients at lesser cost with better mortality.
Dr. Diwan, I would request
That's the
you
last
to-
one.
Yeah.
And that is the tool which can be used to save more acute patients. This is our growth. We have not moved to 83, 85 beds. We have done thrombolysis through eICU. You can do septic shock management through eICU. You can do data analysis through eICU tools. Ultimately, that CN is about saving lives, and that is what the key is. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would now request Mr. Anil Bajpai, the co-founder and CTO of PMHLC.
You would have seen disclaimer in movies that no animals were hurt during the shooting of the film. Similarly, those of us who have been in the corporate life would have heard death by PowerPoint. I assure you, I'm not going to make you die PowerPoint presentation, maybe prick you a little for two reasons. One, we are a startup and we are yet to operationalize our offerings, and hence there is not much of the information that is available about my achievements so far in this PPT. Second, sitting here and waiting for my turn, I drank too much water. So the time between closing my presentation and rushing to the loo is getting shorter and shorter. We talked a lot about data, how we can analyze, what kind of tools we can use, how we can slice, dice, all that things. But the key question is that where is data? Do we know that if your spouse was suffering from fever 3 years back, which antibiotics worked and which antibiotics didn't? Do we know that if we were hurt and we had a fracture 5 years back, where that X-ray is lying? And next time again, if we are getting hit there, do we have access to that? So the biggest question, while health is the most important thing in our life, and that is why so many people are here, almost full auditorium here, the real challenge is we can have a lot of technology, whatever we want, but at the same time, the data that is available that can be analyzed, the data that can be utilized and called big data analytics is simply not available. Even for a single person in his lifetime, if he try to collect the data relating to health, maybe in multiples of hundreds of terabytes, but unfortunately today it is in bits and pieces. You have some prescription, some report, more than a year old, the papers you have torn, the data is simply doesn't exist and is not available from where you can recall. Second thing is medical data, healthcare data, unlike your DMAT account, unlike your bank statement, unlike your mutual fund, unlike your LIC policies, where there is a standards and where government is doing, financial organizations are doing to keep the data in one place, unfortunately, the institutions which are involved in providing healthcare are simply not willing to share the data. Number one, it is not standardized. Number two, nobody wants to give the data to even the patient, forget about another organization. That is another big challenge. Next is, for the healthcare institutes and service providers, there is no ownership to retain, recall, update, store, keep it safe. 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, somebody wants to get the data, access to his data, access to his health care, access to his disease, access to his treatment, that is simply not available and nobody is willing to give. And lastly, while technology is available, while mobile phones are available, while best of the equipments are being brought in by clinics, hospitals and others, still I will say technology adoption in healthcare has been very, very poor. So the need of the hour is, and that is our second initiative. First initiative is e-pharmacy, and we will be coming out with that in the next couple of weeks. But our second and more important initiative is that your health should be in your pocket. We are trying to work on creating health exchange, which will make sure that we talk to the hospitals, we talk to the doctors, we talk to the paramedics, we talk to your family, we help you, we incentivize you to keep your health-related data in your own mobile, which you can access whenever you want, wherever you want. And for that, a lot of work has to be done by us, by you, and by regulatory institutes, so that we can perhaps forget about standardization or analyzing the data, but at least we can create the data and we can keep the data in one place. So the initiative by us is to create health exchange, create repository of data, and make sure that you can access for you as well as your close family members. Of course, there are a lot of benefits of the big data mining. I would like to go very briefly into that, touch that the healthcare of tomorrow need to be using big data analytics, need to be personalized, need to be proactive, need to be predictive, and need to be preventative. When we say personalized, then it is not just sufficient that which particular disease can be cured by which type of medicines or which type of operation, but also how it is there with you. What is so specific about you that only one particular set of medicine or only one particular type of operation should be done by you, on you, and not something else. So what is the need is that definitely big data, once it is available, it can help in providing personalized treatment rather than generic one. Another thing is proactive. Earlier, Sanjeev Kumarji talked about we should think about those who are healthy and not only those who are about to die. So the question is that we should plan proactively not only those who are having active disease or symptoms, but also those who are at the low risk. And again, big data, amount of the data that is available can definitely provide a lot of help into those kind of segments which are at the low risk level, and things and initiatives can be taken at that stage itself. I know I'm running out of the time, so very quickly I would like to talk about predictive healthcare also. The next thing is that what we want is that we are creating our own health exchange, but what we want that let there be 500 health exchanges, health exchange platforms in this country. The amount, the population, the quality of healthcare that is there currently in this country requires enormous amount of effort, enormous amount of data, enormous amount of storage of the data and analysis on that data, so that we can predict that, okay, this kind of weather is there, this kind of dengue or swine flu has started spreading, what kind of chaos it can create, and how we can make sure that we do take a right kind of measures right now so that we can predict and prevent further deterioration in the health of our society. A couple of things which will be required here. We will need help from regulatory environments also. Electronic health record or electronic medical records, whatever are being called, they must be standardized. There should be certain incentives from the government to store the data and facilitate the data and easily exchange the data between one set of service providers to another set of healthcare service providers, and make sure that data creation, data restoration, updation, and exchange becomes the key priority, and that will certainly help a lot in making sure that we have preventive health care. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bajpai. I'm sorry, we are actually running short of time. We've already crossed 10 minutes in our session, though we did start late. So probably just a field a question from the audience if there is any, otherwise we'll stop the discussion over here. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Really informative session. I have a quick question for Mr. Shirish Sahai. I represent eClinical Works, and we are a leader in healthcare IT coming from United States. We are already using UpToDate. We have hundreds of hospitals who is already using the CDSS system. Do we have a drug database that we can implement in the Indian hospital market at this point of time? And integrate it with our current EMR and PM?
The database that we have is based on the journals, and a lot of the journals which are published from India are also incorporated in that. Like for example, we have a case of Kala Azar with HIV patient. There is a paper which was published by the BHU hospital, so that has been incorporated. To answer specifically on the hospital system, yes, we have. In fact, I was just telling him that, in fact, Manipal is a user of UpToDate, and we were talking. But the new change that we have brought, all UpToDate used to reside in a computer in a library. Now you can imagine that how useful that can be. So that itself is useful. But now we have that in the mobile of every person in that hospital. So that, in fact, I want to talk to you about. We can give that access based on the IP. So that's also there.
I'm sorry, you'll have to make this question specific to analytics. Okay. So if you got something in predictive data, predictive analytics, big data, then the question is valid.
Sure, I think I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Easy question to do with predictive analytics and big data? Yes, Shri, sorry.
Yeah, the question is definitely about analytics. We are talking about forward-looking analytics based on big data, the data which actually will result into a decision making. My question is about the ownership of the decision, the business decision, and we are talking about life and death here. Who owns that decision? As I understand, it is based on the mathematical model. There'll be some degree of accuracy involved, probabilistic analytics and all that. So it's a very basic and challenging question that I'm trying to ask. It might not be answered to the degree of accuracy that we have, but who owns that decision? Who will stand for it and who will sign for it?
I think that's a very good question, and that's what we are going through with FDA. If there is a CDSS model, which is Clinical Decision Support System model, is the decision of the model is final? If it is final, let's say it is wrong because it cannot be 100% correct, then who is liable? So for that, FDA still doesn't have an answer. So where they are saying is, if you have a retrospective analysis, like I can identify these people are going to be sicker, or this person might end up in an ICU, or this person has got higher chances of complications, then it's still vetted by the clinical pathway group or clinical committee group or IRB of the hospital. And the hospital doesn't change clinical guideline too often because you're not doing clinical trial on this part. So this is the concerning area for CDSS. So where things have got adopted now in various hospitals across the world is people are now getting benefited about predictive analytics before we are treating somebody into acute care. But acute care, even I would say, maybe CDSS has not become that effective to be helping doctors to decide whether I should ventilate now or I should not be ventilating now. But definitely for predicting, let's say, predicting sepsis earlier, predicting ICU admission earlier, predicting whether this is a stroke or not a stroke. So those kind of areas, I think it's getting there. But on the other side, I think if you understand the economic impact of it, recently Xerox launched something in New York State called fraud, abuse, and analysis. So I do see the similar issue with, let's say, many developing countries where we spend a lot of amount of money on public health, but somewhere we want to know whether the money is really reaching the intended place, whether it is reaching or not. So a very similar situation in US where doctors claim something which they should not have claimed, and we can identify this merely through data rather than, asking these difficult questions. And that has really made a big difference for New York State to adopt this. So these kind of things can definitely work in to start with, which are semi-clinical to non-clinical. And slowly, I think, as accuracy improves, it will go towards clinical decision.
Thanks, Dr. Satish, but I guess we've really crossed the time. I'm sorry, we will not be able to take your question, so we'll just come down and talk to you about it. Really sorry about that. Thank you so much for participating in HIMSS, and thank you so much for a wonderful discussion.